Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Mesopotamia.
Oh, that means we're talking about that gorilla, right?
No, not the gorilla. You're confusing Hammurabi with the old Babylonian king Hammurabi. They're two completely different things. Hammurabi, Harambe, Hammurabi, Harambe. Whatever, we'll unpack that in a second. Hit it. In our last episode, we covered the beginnings of history, where it all began from a biblical worldview. We talked about the Garden of Eden and the flood and the Tower of Babel and how that dramatically impacted the way that people lived. And from that, we concluded that humans began to move because of their pursuit of food and shelter. And that's where we pick up the story. Today, we're going to cover how civilizations or groups of people that banded together for survival began to emerge in the Middle East, specifically in a region called Mesopotamia. It's home to the world's oldest cities and civilizations. And ironically, you've actually heard of it before. In Greek, the word Mesopotamia means the land between two rivers. And that's no coincidence. The land between two rivers refers directly to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. That's right, the same rivers that the Garden of Eden was located between. So it makes sense that this area is often called by historians the cradle of civilization, or where civilization was born. It's where our first civilizations are, and we know it's also where the world and history truly began. Once again, history confirms the Bible, and the Bible confirms history. The modern-day location of this area, known as the Fertile Crescent, is in between Iraq and Iran. The area maintains this name because of the Tigris and Euphrates creating a dense river valley that was very fertile, allowing farming. Remember, before the construction of civilizations and cities, people were mostly nomadic. They moved around following their food. Well, no longer. Remember, we said there was something coming called farming. And the river valleys created by both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers created a wonderful location to plant and grow crops. So naturally, these people who used to be nomadic would settle down here in order to build a civilization. And when you're building a civilization, the first thing you need is water and food. The Tigris and Euphrates provided both of that. The result is very quickly some new civilizations pop up in the form of city-states. We're not looking at massive kingdoms yet. We're just looking at small cities that govern themselves. Each one would typically have its own ruler or leader, and they would be mostly independent. And these early civilizations were called the civilizations and city-states of Sumer. Sumer is typically the world's first civilization, and it has the structure and organization that we deem necessary to have a true civilization. Things like a direct social structure, classes based on jobs and occupation and wealth, systems of exchange and bartering in order to maintain and receive the goods that you need to potentially survive. And as well as a complicated set of beliefs or worldviews, in this case, polytheistic religion. Polytheism refers to the belief in many gods, and this was true for many people around the world, especially early in history. See, people didn't really understand the way the world worked. So it made sense to them that there was a different God for everything around them. And because survival was based on food especially, the things needed to produce food were referred to as gifts of or actions of the gods. So for example, there would be a god for the sun and a god for the rain. You needed both of them to produce the food in this new farming river valley system. And these people are a little bit backward and a little bit old school, so they were very literal in their thinking. And their thought was the gods live high above in the world, and in order to talk to them, you would have to get close to them. So they built these massive pyramids and towers called ziggurats that were used by priests to climb up and communicate with the gods. At least that's what everyone else thought. In reality, it was probably just the priests saying they talked to the gods and making everything up. So it's pretty clear that priests were pretty powerful in the ancient world. Overall, Sumer is our location of our first cities, like the city of Ur and Erech, and they have early pieces of organization that really allow for these civilizations to thrive. They're also going to bring new inventions into the world that make life easier. Remember, rule number one, people are lazy. Two major things invented in Mesopotamia, the wheel and writing. The wheel made work easier and took burdens off of actual people. This first system of writing was called cuneiform, and it involved picture writing, not letters and words, rather pictures and symbols that would represent words. While primitive and probably a little bit difficult to understand, you can understand how important this system of writing is. It allows a system for business and transactions, but more importantly, it creates a way for us to remember and record history, and we know how important that is. All right, so Sumer, pretty organized, pretty important in the way in which it brought some new technologies and ways to live and better survive. But Sumer's time is relatively short, because in about 2300 BCE, a ruler named Sargon II from another city-state called Arcadia came in and conquered many of the Sumerian city-states. And essentially he created the world's first true empire, or a collection of states under one authority. You know this empire better by the name of its capital city, Babylon. And Babylon is probably the first true state and empire of the ancient world, and it's very successful, building on much of what the Sumerians originally did in their means of technology, structure, and organization. And one ruler in particular will change the way we look at life forever. That's right, not to be confused with the gorilla Harambe, we're talking about the ruler Hammurabi. You know what, actually, to just get out of the way, what if we combine the two? Clearly, Photoshop isn't my forte. I'll just stick to teaching history. Hammurabi is often known as Hammurabi the Lawgiver. He's one of the first rulers to institute a system of laws. See, like you and me, Hammurabi recognized some things about people. Number one, that they're lazy, and number two, that they're jerks. And in their pursuit of food and survival, they're often awful to each other. And you and I know that that's a reflection truly of our sinful nature. But in order for a civilization truly to survive, there needs to be order. At least that's what Hammurabi believed. And he believed that the best way to create order was to install punishments for certain crimes so that people wouldn't commit them in the future, when they would see what would happen as a result. This type of law is called corporal punishment, meaning there was usually bodily harm involved. This eye for an eye style of punishment became known as Hammurabis Code, a code of over 300 laws that were written down and posted for everyone to see so that everyone knew exactly what the law was and what they should and should not do. Eye for an eye basically means if something is done to you, that same thing should be done to the other person. It's a very literal form of justice and often very painful. Clearly, it has its effects. For example, if the penalty for theft is getting your hand cut off, not only will you not want to steal something again because you don't want to lose your other hand, you have a physical reminder of how you shouldn't do that, as well as the fact that the government has now taken away the ability for you to steal with that hand. Now, I think it's effective, but it's obvious we don't really have that system today in the United States, and I encourage you to think about what the United States would be like if we enacted corporal punishment. But Hammurabi's Code sets a precedent for written laws, and it's something that every nation ever has really had since. It's probably also effective in the fact that it was posted throughout the cities of Babylon. On large stone statues, the laws would be carved for everyone to see. Therefore, there was no excuse for not following the law. Now, Hammurabi in Babylon would continue to prosper. He built up a large military to protect their food and their overall interests. And in the ancient world, Babylon is truly a power. But that's all going to change relatively soon. Remember, not everyone's a civilization. We still have nomads running around. And many of those nomads will have a dramatic impact on history. The first group is the Hittites. The Hittites were horsemen from modern-day Turkey who frequently invaded the city-states of Babylon and Sumer. Very violent in nature, but they had also discovered how to utilize the strong metal of iron, creating strong swords, shields, axes, and spears to dominate their opponent. And because of their nomadic nature, the Hittites will continue to follow their food, and naturally that leads them to the city-states of Sumer and Babylon, leading to a number of different conflicts. But more importantly, the Hittites introduced to the Sumerians and Babylonians the use of iron, as well as how to use horses and chariots in both military and agriculture. This is a pattern we're going to see throughout world history. It's generally nomads who, for whatever reason, happen to be horse people from Central Asia. It happens time and again. They bring new technologies and they bring new culture as they move throughout the world. There's plenty of examples of that to come. And on a more peaceful note, there's another nomadic group called the Phoenicians who will bring culture, trade, and technology to Babylon and beyond. Known as carriers of civilization, the Phoenicians developed numerous trading posts and sailed throughout the Mediterranean world, dominating sea travel. They also introduced the world to the first true alphabet, which used letters to create words. The Phoenicians show us that these ideas of how to run a civilization so that it can survive and thrive will not be contained just to Mesopotamia. It's going to be spread throughout the world, and we'll unpack that later on. Babylon's riches and success will cause it to be the envy of the Mesopotamian and Middle Eastern world. And remember, because people are lazy and people are jerks, they're going to do anything they can to survive and live more comfortably. So Babylon will quickly become the target of many other growing states. But that is a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.